It's a great day here at Kekfilet's YouTube channel. Blah, 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 blah. Part 2, Doflamingo guide. You guys already know the drill. This is the intermediate level. If you saw video yesterday, that's kind of a beginner level. And today I am talking about mistakes with Doflamingo. And I'm going to have a mix of tips to level up your game and mistakes everyone makes. Before I get into the video, I do put a lot of work into editing all this information. I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to the channel. Now, without further ado, let's get into the goo. Before I actually start the full guide, I want to actually define one word, and that is tempo. Tempo is a resource that's related to the board presence and how well your cards match up against your opponents. And in Doflamingo, that's really the main thing we got going for us. If your opponent actually ruins your tempo by just disrupting your board, because that's your main strength, then that's how you're going to lose most games. If you're facing Doflamingo, your main objective should be to disrupt their board to do that. We need to think within the realm of what your opponent's trying to do against you and how you can really fight against that. I had an interesting strategy back all the way in OP03 when people had an issue against Katakuri. Against Katakuri, they would just kind of lose the late game, tall body game, but that's not what you wanted to do. You wanted to go all in on this kind of wide board strategy. And Katakuri would just clear your board because your board was always rested. But what if your board wasn't rested for at least one turn? And I'll go into those things and tips as we go along. Mistake number one I see people doing is they use their leader skill too much early. Especially when you're going first, you actually kind of want your opponent to hit you in the face at least once so you can start drawing some more cards. It makes your deck more consistent, but you actually have more power to counter out. Maybe you can get hit twice so you have an even large hand to defend your board. Keep in mind if your opponent is capable of playing a pudding against you like you can against them. If you just keep playing rested cards out and they keep attacking your board, you're eventually going to be running out of cards and your opponent is just now forced to clear your board and play the Star of Dofi game, which without a hand, you can't really keep up your tempo and they'll just kill you all the way from 4 life to 0 life. Because Doflamingo is so 4-drop based, it doesn't have a way to compete with these really tall decks if they're able to get there. A misconception, a part of this as well, a lot of people think that if you just call out a card rested, it's used as a pseudo blocker, as in they didn't attack my leader, they attacked my character. But the main thing to realize, you need to put your opponent on a clock. You can't afford to go to a really far late game because every deck just has better top end than you do. A tip I like to do is 2 rested bodies is harder to deal with than 1. If you just play out your rested body off the top of your deck, it's kind of not that great. But if you already have a body out and you attack with that and then call another rested card, that's going to be really difficult for them just to deal with. And hopefully because of that 1 turn lag, they attacked your leader, you got an extra card. Now it's easier flow for you. This is sort of a basic thing, but that's why I brought it up in the intermediate tip. Another big tip is what cards should we call off the top of the deck? And there's a lot of things you have to think about. Number 1 is your board state. Number 2 is the cards in your hand and the cards in your trash. And number 3 is how much of the top of the deck can you keep seeing? If you have an empty board, I would suggest a Jinbe if you have a card in your hand. 6k bodies, Law, if you can get them off effectively and you have a 1 cost to call off. And the Gecko trial deck card to get cards out of the trash. Now, if you have 2 or more cards on your board, it's not all that efficient now to call certain cards off the top of your deck. But I would tell you that Law, in order to help remove your opponent's board, and also just recur a 1 cost on your thing is the next best thing. And then that Gecko from the trial deck is just going to be really big when defending your board, because if you have a large board and you have that card out, it's going to be, really effective again. And finally, 6K bodies. Those 6K bodies are just always going to be a menace. Your opponent has to almost ignore them in order to beat the 5K bodies first and then come back to the 6K bodies, because they're just going to always be a problem. Another mistake I see is people using Jinbe when you already have a full board. You can just place one card and get the value. And the main thing is, it's better just to use that for Dawn, maybe, instead of even playing a card. When you can just use that Dawn to clear your opponent's board and such. A big thing too that happens, people get really Jinbe happy, just playing Jinbe after Jinbe after Jinbe. But there might be a turn where you may not want to play a Jinbe to play another card, because they're going to clear your board and you want to use that again next turn. A big tip I have for practicing, they call it goldfishing in Magic, or I call it solitaire. And you really want to practice this kind of play and try to use this to help your memorization for things on top of your deck. Doflamingo is actually a very unique deck where you actually might dig pretty far deep and use all 5 cards. So practice memorizing the top of your deck is a great skill to have when it comes with practice. I normally will keep options open in case my opponent does something a little less expected, but maybe that's a little bit more advanced. Just get the process of understanding what maybe a good idea is. And with solitaire, just play by yourself and really pretend your opponent's either really, really bad or really, really good. They're removing stuff on your board, they're not removing stuff on your board, and you're just trying to use that whole top 5 memorization in order to get through the game. Doflamingo is actually the easiest deck to learn by yourself. It's easiest to practice with this. Other decks are very reactive, where Doflamingo is a little bit more proactive, so you can actually practice those sort of combos ahead of time before you don't know what to do in a game state. Another mistake I see people make is not bottom decking the top 5 searches if they don't have anything good. Now understand, when you play a card that looks at the top 5 and organizes them, consider that top 5 an extension of your hand. It's on demand. Next turn, you'll draw that card and you can play that or use that with your leader skill. If you need to find a certain piece for a card, get tempo, maybe win a game, that's absolutely just great. But if you don't see those cards that you need to see, like Femur, Jinbe, Boa, then I suggest just bottom decking those cards. There's nothing more sad than a Doflamingo playing a Perona, using the skill, and the next turn playing another Perona, because they really didn't dig any deeper, and it's just kind of sad. It's almost better just to look at top 5 and bottom deck it if you don't have the right pieces. A main thing you can do as well, if you really don't like the top 5 of your deck, I suggest using a Sengoku after you use your Perona, or maybe do that beforehand and then go through that motions of actually using your leader skill with a top searcher. Tip: sequence your attacks to be unpredictable. This comes up way too much when your opponent has a 6K blocker. In Dofi, it's smart to calculate what you can swing before, and then get ready to swing smaller to bigger. If your opponent can block, use a 1K, block for free, block 2K, really be ready to threaten that blocker. If you end the turn with swinging a 5K at their leader and they still have that blocker up, that blocker was never in threat, and they just got a free card out of you, getting that value off of that 6K blocker. You don't want to give them that value. The whole point of playing Doflamingo is putting them in uncomfortable spots and sequencing things in the right order to make your opponent counter ineffectively. Mistake: people feel like they're already lost or have this loser mentality when they go first. It's not ideal to go first, but really you kind of want to leverage it with a different strategy. Maybe on 3 Dawn, consider just swinging 7K with a blind leader skill and hope for the best. And on 5 Dawn, just play the deck as if you were a 4 Dawn, and if you have like an extra attack to begin with and an extra Dawn. Your biggest asset really is the fact that you were able to attack first, so you may have a different strategy. In the advanced video, I'll have more on this, but one strategy is to force your opponent to 2 life. With that, if you're able to survive and have a board a little bit, once you get there, you can just keep pushing your opponent and their life to get them down to 0 life and Femur. Just the fact that Femur exists means they need to respect it. Even if you don't actually have it in your hand, play like you do, and it forces your opponent to play not optimally. Tip: use that Dawn to attack your opponent. You don't always have to be playing multiple cards if you have them in your hand. You need to put your opponent to 0 life and attack once. Be adaptive. Don't be too predictable. Blue Doflamingo, because it's very consistent, actually is pretty predictable in what they're going to play. And really recognize when your opponent's blocker situation isn't great, their hand isn't great, how they're countering, if they're using 2Ks, multiple 1Ks, if they're not defending their board, things that just don't make sense, start trying to make sense of them. And that's all I really have today for you guys in this video. Our next video will be the advanced video, going over how to utilize our strongest presence, pudding, and the mirror match and game plan, and much more. Again, I appreciate you all if you left a like, subscribe when you want to see more, and I'll see you all in the next video. Ciao.